Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. So welcome everyone, 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't know about you guys, but I am not a morning person. So I might have over-indexed on the coffee this morning to compensate. So hopefully we can match each other's energy. So who am I? Why am I standing in front of you? Erica Favorito. I have been in tech and in startups for almost 20 years now. My very first startup I joined was in 2005, and that's when Meta was still the Facebook.com. And I've had a lot of different roles. I've been in marketing, I've been in sales, and I've been in CS for about 10 years now. So that's not to say that I have all of the answers. That's just to say that sometimes I have a few good ideas. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about onboarding fundamentals. And so my hope for you is that you leave here with an outline of what your onboarding experience and what your onboarding organization should look like relative to the stage that your company is at now. And so related to that, we're going to have our very first poll just to ask you guys, what stage is your startup in right now? Are you super early, which meaning, no customers, you're in stealth mode, you're just in beta? Are you early, up to 2 million in revenue, growing up to 10, or scaling beyond 10 million? All right, so it looks like we have super early and early, super early. Okay. All right, so lots of early folks. So I think this is great because we'll be able to hopefully leave you guys with a lot of good nuggets here. All right. All right, so with onboard. Oh.
So how do I get to this? Or will there be more polls? I just have.
Yes, there will be 2 more polls. Rachel, do you want to? Thank you very much. All right. So onboarding, where expectations meet reality. And as we all know, reality can sometimes be a little disappointing. And really what onboarding is, it's the first test of the trust the customer has placed in you. And the reason why there's so much emphasis on onboarding in the customer journey is because the seeds of churn are planted really early. I'm sure everyone here in the room and everyone online has heard the little quip, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. But that's even more difficult for post-sales teams because sales has already made the very first impression. And with sales, they're selling the dream, the perfect situation where nothing ever goes wrong. And the customer has a lot of questions as they're taking those first steps beyond the sales process. Are you listening? Do you understand us? Not just the facsimile of firmographic information that's in your CRM, but us. Are you going to do what you said? Because they've probably worked with a lot of software, a lot of organizations where that didn't happen. Is this going to be a pain in the butt to launch, to get through? And ultimately, was the money worth what we spent, right? So there's a lot of the white heat of anxiety coming from your customers when they're starting this journey for you. And onboarding is the first point of the customer journey where you have to show, not just tell. So what does a successful onboarding look like? So first of all, time to value. You guys have probably heard this before, but getting folks to the point where they are recognizing value is really important. To do that quickly. Another point about value too is that it's not value in terms of how your organization defines it. It's you have to understand how your customer defines that. So value is where they start to be able to solve the problem with which they came to you in the first place. That doesn't always mean that it has to happen within onboarding itself, but that means at least post-onboarding that has to happen very quickly and very smoothly. Second thing here is comfort with tech. That means that the customer can do the beautiful basics on their own, and you're investing in them up front so they become more capital efficient over time. And I see a ton of startups make the mistake of trying to do everything for their customers from the beginning. And there are a few instances where this can make sense. If you are in stealth mode, if you are in beta mode, if you are beyond that 10 million and maybe you're to 25 and you have enterprise customers and their expectations are really high. But these are limited instances. And the reason why I think this is a mistake is because if you're doing everything for your customer, you're accelerating your burn through high cost to serve. And then there's a big difference, right, between agency margins and SaaS margins. And if you're transforming your post-sales organization into what's essentially an agency, you're going to get into trouble with burn later on. And what I suggest is that you use that money that you're using on people to fill gaps by productizing ease of use. And that will just make you more efficient, not just for today, but it's really hard to get out of this mode later on. So set yourself up for success in the future. And then lastly is curiosity. So with curiosity, I mean, the customer is asking questions. They're engaging with support. I think engaging with support is actually a positive sign of retention. And the reason why is because the ones that might be barking up a storm in your support channels are not the ones that you should be worried about, even if they're telling you that they're upset. And the reason why is because at least those folks are invested and they're trying to problem solve. The folks that you really have to worry about are the folks you don't hear from. What you should be worried about most is apathy. Speaking of which, what are some signs that onboarding is going sideways? So there's misalignment, and then there's what I like to call the urgency continuum. So misalignment is just, those mismatched expectations. Do they have misunderstanding about what the product does? Do they have misunderstandings about the depth of post-sale support or how they have to prepare to utilize your product and to engage with you? So that's one key area. And then with lack of urgency, if folks are, they're hard to get on a call, they're not responding to you, they seem distracted, that could be a signal that they either aren't expecting a ton of value or they don't see the importance or enough importance in your product, or they aren't clear on the outcomes. On the other end of the spectrum, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, we have folks who have way too much urgency and they really want to skip important steps. And you're sitting here thinking like, oh, this is not going to go well for you later. So when customers try to do that, they may get what they ask for, but they're not going to get what they want. And in that case, what I think this is typically is that your power users or your champions are either disorganized or they have too much on their plate. And if you're getting those kind of signals, they're going to have trouble not only implementing your product, but they're going to have trouble successfully advocating for your tool and the budget for your tool within their organization. So to make sure that doesn't happen, let's talk about designing your onboarding journey. So there's a couple of things that we'll talk about here, but essentially it's about setting expectations, both in terms of the order of operations, but also what your role as an onboarding team versus what the customer needs to do and preparing them for success. There's also a level of discovery that, of course, is going to be much more in depth than what has happened in the sales process, at least from a product use point of view. And then, of course, that time to value piece, again, getting to where the customer recognizes value very quickly. So I'm going to dig in a little bit to each of these. So number one, clear roadmap here. The customer should always know what comes next, what will happen, when it will happen, and with who. And this doesn't have to be a high-tech solution here. This can literally be a shared spreadsheet, a shared document with due dates, milestones, owners, progress, that kind of thing, if you have a tech-intensive implementation, right? Anytime that there is an opportunity to make something that's abstract more concrete, do it. And by that, I mean, show them what good looks like, more than just here's a timeline of all of the things. Here's a spreadsheet of the dates and the milestones, but hey, Mr. or Ms. Customer, this is what we're going for. This would be an ideal state. Say you are a marketing tool, for example. This is what a great campaign looks like, and we want to get you to this point. So they understand what that endpoint, or what the endpoint for onboarding at least, is going to look like, and they have that mental model in their mind. The other thing that you want to do is proactively ask along the way if you're meeting their expectations. Don't be afraid of the answers. Don't be afraid of a negative response. You should know that, instead of if you don't have that information, that's worse than hearing it. And my belief is that customer satisfaction is not the absence of negative comments, but the affirmative presence of positive ones. So as you're asking your customers, hey, is this matching your expectations? Is this okay with you? Is this what you expected? If they just kind of brush it off and say, okay, yeah, that's great, give them another opportunity, dig in. And if there's something within the process that we're all, we all have good, emotional intelligence here in this room. In your opinion, if you have been working with them and you felt that something was a little off, ask them specifically about it and allow them to dig in. Okay. Continuous discovery. So sorry if you're in sales, I might dig on you a little here, but sales is about getting to yes. Post-sales discovery is about getting it done. Guys, we are the ones who get it done, right? And so we have to confirm the information that we have. And beyond that, also ask if anything has changed, because if we're all working in tech, especially if you have customers who are in small or medium businesses, things are going to change really quickly on their side too. So confirm the information that you have. The other thing is to make sure that you're uncovering any assumptions that the customer may have. This is tough, right? Because you kind of have to get in their brain a little bit. What are some common assumptions? So for example, maybe going back to the example of you are a marketing tool. Maybe a lot of customers expect that you integrate with this very common CRM and you don't. Tell them that upfront, confirm that so that they don't expect that later on. And it's not easy to be able to do this. I think that learning what assumptions that your customers might be making comes through experience at your company. It comes through domain expertise. This is an aside, but I love hiring folks who maybe they haven't done onboarding before, but they have expertise in that domain. That can be really, really helpful. And just using that noggin, right? Using that logic to understand, like, are they going to expect this? The other thing too is making sure you have the right person to answer your questions. One of the things I forgot to mention on that roadmap piece was, in addition to laying out what's going to happen when those milestones, you also want to create an account map of who's responsible for what in that company. So if someone's responsible for tech, if someone's responsible for design, maybe there's someone else responsible for strategy, and making sure that you're directing your questions to the right people if they are different. Yeah, question, go for it.
In terms of the responsibilities within the company, is
Yeah.
that part of the document of like, here's the timeline, here's what we expect? Or is that like just an internal, like in your CRM?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I like to have two different documents: an internal account plan, right, which has like all the little details, and you can have little notes, right? Okay, like this is what, VP of marketing, like Susan really cares about, all that sort of internal information. And then there's a customer facing, exactly like you said, more of a project plan. That's here's the milestones, here's the dates, here's the owners, right? Great question. All right. So the other thing to be really clear about are your support expectations. And I don't just mean a support team. I just mean supporting your customers overall. Small s support. Be very clear about what your team will do on the customer's behalf and what the customer needs to own. I'm going to say something maybe radical, and that is you can say no to the customer, especially if you were clear and you got confirmation that you were clear from the beginning. And remember, you can always be flexible and say yes to things you said no to before, but the opposite is not true. You can't put that genie back in the bottle, right? So set the expectations clear. And if you want to be able to flex to do something for a customer that you wouldn't normally do because of extenuating circumstances, you can do that. I truly believe healthy boundaries make for happy customers, certainly happy employees, and more successful startups in general. Related to that is keeping your customer accountable, because you know what it takes to make them successful. And again, you are not an agency. I also don't like the term extension of your team, because I think that can often set the wrong expectations too. And so having that document of, okay, Mr. Customer, these were the things that you said you would do. When you have some sort of review meeting, you can say, hey, we're still waiting on this. And they can say, oh yeah, I forgot. Okay. And so then they're not necessarily coming to you and saying, why aren't we at this point yet? And you're like, awkwardly, well, like, you have to send us that stuff. Remember, Jim, that you were going to send us these things. So, just having those shared resources and keeping the customer accountable. This is a little tactical, but I love letting the customers drive during training. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who are great at training, but even the most engaging trainer, it's really easy for someone to be able to multitask or zone out, or just doing it yourself is the best way to learn. And so I love being able to show something to a customer and then giving them the mouse saying, okay, I'm going to give control of the screen to you. Now you do it. And there's just more of a muscle memory when they have to click through the buttons than when you're just showing it to them. You're there to enable them to become independent, right? So having them do it is the best way to learn. We talked about documentation. Related to that is these self-serve and asynchronous resources. So by that, I mean your knowledge base. You probably have an internal wiki with all, or you should have an internal wiki with all the different product hacks and process and all that kind of stuff. Especially that customer-facing product information will make your entire organization, if that's well done, that is, if that's well done, if there is a distinct owner within your organization, that is going to make everyone so much more efficient. And the reason why, it's not just for the customer to discover it on their own, but when you think about a support interaction, an onboarding interaction, your CSMs, they're going to be pulling from all of these resources, right? And so if your onboarding manager, if your CSM has to type it up and reinvent the wheel every single time they have to give this information to a customer, as opposed to saying, here, Jill, here's the information you wanted, link to bullet points and a 30-second video on how to do it, it just makes the process that much more, just goes through much more quickly. And the last thing I'll say, I'll get up on my, I guess I'm at a podium, but I'll get up on my little soapbox for a second and say, investing in your support experience early is a huge differentiator. I have seen this over and over again at the startups that I have worked at. And I think support teams are so underestimated in terms of their impact on the business, and it kind of drives me nuts. We all know the software market is crowded. It's a little tougher this year than it's been in some other years. And even if your technology is a differentiator today, the chances are that it won't always be. We like to copy each other, right? We're just stupid monkeys in clothes at the end of the day, right? But what is a consistently excellent customer experience is the widest, deepest, most defensible moat that you can build, because that is built over time. It is not easily copied. I remember there's a Maya Angelou quote that I love that's like, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I truly believe that. And I've seen it work. Okay, last thing in this section are quick wins. So small successes are fuel for big successes. You don't have to boil the ocean. It's all about building momentum. When you're showing that customer what good looks like, it doesn't have to be the complete end stage, everything's built out, we're all done. It's like, hey, this is what good looks like for step one, you know, and so that they can see that. Achieving their outcomes, if you do that, achieving their outcomes will seem a lot more attainable and less painful. And that time to value too, that will seem much faster if you're defining what success looks along the way with those milestones versus just at the end of the road. All right. So just to wrap up this section, this is what a sample onboarding version can look like. And it has a lot of these things, right? So clarity and boundaries, that would be your kickoff meeting, the reinforcing some async training that they need to do, reviewing what the onboarding process would look like. There's a couple discovery pieces in here too, the kickoff meeting, the requirements document again, customer accountability, they got to get to training, they got to give you some documentation, you want them to review, and then the quick wins and smooth transitions as well. So I'll pause here for a second. Are there any questions in the chat that we want, or in the room, that we want to address before moving forward?
So we do have, it looks like a couple questions. Happy to defer to in-person audience, and then we can toggle back and forth. I will ask that everyone just talks into the mic, so that way all the virtual attendees are able to benefit from hearing that. So does anyone have anything so far in person? Perfect.
And we might get to this, so if it's mistimed, that's fine.
No worries.
What about the timing of kicking off onboarding right now? And so my question is, like, I'm basically sales CS team of one. I'm the founder. I've got my paying clients, and the salesperson in me is like, time kills deals. Time kills deals. It's just like push. But literally, I'm onboarding a client this morning where like there's one step missing on their side, and I'm wondering, like, I mean, I'm already committed to this plan, but in the future, is that a mistake? Meaning, like, should I wait for, like, if we have 3 things they need to do internally and they've done 2 of the 3, do I, like, delay the official onboarding and kickoff for that to finish? Or it's like, no, like, we'll get it done in the next 48 hours. Let's just move the process. What's the balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I like the starting as soon as possible, right? You want to keep that momentum. And as long as the customer is clear that you're waiting on them, and that you can't, and you communicate to them like, hey, we can't move forward. Like we've done the 2 out of the 3 steps. You need to do this until we go forward. But yeah, I'm with you. Like speed is certainly key here, right? Keep that momentum going. Any other questions?
Yes, I think another one is you spoke about this idea of investing in support very early on and how that will pay humongous dividends in the long run.
Yeah.
But specifically, say in early stage startups where everything's moving 1,000 miles a minute, everything's reprioritized at every single point. How, as someone who recognizes the value in this, should you communicate that internally to the team, and sort of how can you best illustrate the real value add that comes with this little bit of effort initially?
Yeah. Do you mean to the customer or to like investors?
To the internal team,
to the
saying
internal
this is
team.
a priority and this is why. And although it will take time, it will take resources.
Gotcha.
It will pay off.
Why does it matter to everyone else?
Exactly.
Because I think for some of the reasons that we talked about before, whereas like that is your defensibility, that is your moat. If your customer experience is your reputation, and it goes far beyond your interaction with that customer for a couple of reasons. Obviously, they're going to have friends in the industry, and they're going to let you know. Number 2, people move jobs a lot, right? And so if they had a great experience with your company at the job they're at now, when they go to the next job, they're going to want to bring you in too. The other thing I'll say is that with some industries, and I experienced this in the e-commerce industry, specifically within the Shopify platform, reviews can be a discovery engine. And that was huge for us at my previous company, where all of our positive reviews actually allowed us to be much more discoverable within that platform. And most of those reviews were about, or a lot of those reviews were about, if not support big S, support small s. And when they were mentioning our folks by name, that's when you know that you have made a great impact there. So that's what I would say. And then, later on, there's some data points, right? You can say like, okay, let's correlate the folks who, gave us a positive CSAT score with their long-term retention of their lifetime value. That would be a later stage sort of thing, because you obviously need that data and you need a core of customers to be able to do that. And you need to be able to set up yourself to be able to do that. But that would be another way to prove that out in a way that's more data driven.
Wonderful. Any other in-person questions for the time being?
All right. So you're just talking about transitions. So a note here. So a great onboarding starts in sales, and a great CSM relationship, if you have CSMs, starts with a great onboarding. Transitions between teams can be really tough. Not so much if you're the only person doing all of it, but they can be the most precarious points in the customer journey. And that's because they're leaky, right? Like, if you're a salesperson, you spent all this time with a customer or some time with a customer and you've learned about them, how do you transfer all of that knowledge? Most early stage teams aren't great at that, and it's not their fault. It's just, like we were saying, everyone's running a mile a minute, and documentation seems like an afterthought because it's annoying. But if you don't have good process, if you don't have good communication and a really clear division of roles, if you have multiple people on your team, it can get messy in a hurry. And so you need accountability for both the customer and with your colleagues, with each other. And when you have that sort of shared process and purpose, then you're going to be able to provide a great experience where you're not asking the customer in onboarding or at the CSM stage, so tell me your goals. You should know. That's a really annoying question for the customer to get asked multiple times. The other thing I'll say, that when you're designing your customer journey, those triggers between teams, defining what that means, that is really important. So that's signifying a change in either ownership or stage. So that's really important to identify. Sales owns it up to this point, and then as soon as we get closed won, then it's onboarding, and it's onboarding is the point of contact until they launch campaign 1, and then we transition them to CSM. So being really clear about that, so it's not unclear to your team who owns what with the customer, because that can be very painful. All right, so let's talk about how to build your onboarding team. So we're going to do another poll here. This is a multi-choice poll. So do you have differentiated roles for the following post-sales roles? So CSM, support, onboarding, tech implementation, and services. And there's more differentiation, but these are probably the top ones. All right, so we got CSM and support and onboarding. Okay, no one. Okay, that's about what I would expect there. Okay, so most people have CSM, support, and onboarding. So here's what your onboarding model can look like dependent on what the stage you're at. So if you're early, right, usually you have support, or often you can have support in CSMs. And this is where CSMs often have a lot of different roles. Usually the onboarding role is pretty well defined because it's either training or tech implementation, and that can be really clear. With CSMs, sometimes CSMs can be responsible for onboarding and training, as well as strategy and commercials. And we could do a whole other session on how CSMs have become the everything department, but that is not what this talk is about. But yeah, usually it's support and CSMs. Sometimes onboarding, usually not. When you're in that growing stage, so, beyond that 2 million point, this is where I start to see more companies have differentiated roles. Sometimes they're called onboarding, sometimes it's called training. And this is, of course, the reason why you do this, right, is to help, scale your resources and also align the different skill sets of the folks in your organizations to different specializations. And then lastly, once you're in that scaling mode, so around that 10 million mark, that's when you have different roles like technical implementation. This is where you get differentiation specifically within onboarding, right? Is it tech implementation? Is it professional services? It could be custom solutions if you want to tread into that area. And these sort of things can start to become necessary if you're serving increasingly large or complex customers, or if your tech is complex. But there's no shame in keeping it super simple and sticking with that early model for as long as you can. All right. And so just a quick note on tone and style. I feel like this goes for all post sales, but probably, any customer interaction. Be brilliant, be brief, and be gone. And what I mean by that is, we have so many meetings, right? Related to be brilliant, right? We have tons of meetings, and it's hard. People don't prepare well for meetings anymore, just because if you look at any of our calendars, right, it's like stack. It's like kind of, gross, the amount of meetings we're all in. If you can build time for yourself, if you're in charge of a team, I would allot per 1 hour of customer facing time, 1 hour of time to prepare for email answering, that kind of thing. If you can manage to do that, you're going to be able to prepare that much better for your customers. Being brief, right? I think it takes genius to say something simply. So if you really know your stuff, you can be really clear and you can be brief. And then be gone, right? And that means use their time wisely, right? Have clear follow-up and action items. Every moment you get in front of a customer is precious. Don't ever let them feel that time with you is a waste. I'd rather you guys have a really productive 15-minute meeting with a customer than a rambling hour-long meeting where the customer is like on Slack and you can tell they're distracted, right? Keep it short, keep it valuable. All right, so how to measure your onboarding success. So this is more of a couple of ideas for you than a detailed map of how to measure. So there's leading and lagging indicators. The lagging indicators, of course, are more focused around the commercials, the financial parts. So you can associate a positive onboarding experience with the renewal and expansion of your customers, the rate of expansion, and then those referrals and testimonials, kind of like we were talking about before, how customers, if they really like you, they're going to refer you to other companies, if not bring you with them to when they move jobs. But there are a lot of ways that you can measure some leading indicators, right? If you have annual contracts, right, it's a long time to wait from a year, right, from when they first kick off to get that feedback of, oh yeah, we're not renewing. So there's things you want to measure along the way to have a more predictable pipeline. So some of those things are, product usage, right? Are they using all the seats that you gave them if you have a seat-based model? Are they using the tool do they have depth and breadth of usage? And by that, I mean, are they using multiple parts of the product, and are they using those parts of the product really, really well? Do they have good time to value? Can you measure the customer's outcomes, right? That's the most important measurement. Can you measure what matters to them and measure your impact on it, right? Because the customer doesn't necessarily care about what we care about, right? They care, did I make more money? Was I more efficient? If there are ways, and this is partially like a product issue too, can you measure success in the way that your customers do? And then again, engagement with support, engagement with your self-serve resources, right? You can do that. And then of course, direct feedback from customers, right? This is more of a qualitative measure, but ask them, right? And then, ask them in a meeting, ask them in surveys. And then of course there's CSAT and NPS, which are more structured ways of getting that information as well. I don't have health scoring in here because again, that could be like a whole other session, but health scoring is really a combination of any of these things together, right? I talk about health scoring with a little trepidation because it's all often misused and abused within organizations. So knowing what goes into a health score and not having just a single metric be your health score, I think is really important. But again, take a bunch of these different indications and then create a matrix score, and that will give you a much more realistic view of what's going on with your customers. All right, so we're going to bring it all together, and hopefully you guys can leave with at least an outline of an onboarding strategy here. So what's your purpose? And jobs to be done. That's what that weird acronym means if you're not aware. So, what is the mission of your team? So for example, maybe I am an e-commerce growth tool for mid-market. Our mission might be to help customers get value from the product in the first 2 weeks or less, and then prepare them to independently utilize the platform basics. Our areas of responsibility might be tech and design setup, integrations, product training, and they're the point of contact through a certain point in the customer journey. And then their tasks, right, are gather campaign requirements, build 2 campaigns, invite the customer to training, all that sort of stuff. So being really clear about what the mission of the team is, their areas of responsibility, and then like the exact things they're supposed to do. Then it comes to roles and responsibilities. Do you need differentiated roles yet? And the way to determine that are the responsibilities here, do they need to be unique? There are a lot of people, I feel like, in startups, especially in fast-moving ones, when you're just figuring all this stuff out, they're actually unclear what their job is, right? And that's dangerous for everyone because that just means they're not going to, if they're unsure of exactly what they're accountable for, that creates those leaky situations, right? Where the customer, they don't know what they're supposed to do internally. No one's sure who owns this point in the customer journey. The customer's confused. We're confused. That's all bad stuff, right? So be as clear as you can with the different roles and responsibilities and where they begin and end. And then your North Star metrics, what is this team accountable for and where can they influence, right? So accountable would be, all right, I'm the onboarding team. I'm accountable for launching 2 campaigns with this customer by the end of their onboarding period. What I might influence is retention and expansion. What I might influence is NPS, right? And so there's different ways to measure that. What I would say is take the critical few metrics, and these might change. These will probably change over time as your organization changes, as you're able to measure more things. And then you can measure that team's accountability and influence. And then the last thing I have on here is a capacity planning model. So what I mean by that is planning for growth in your organization. And I feel like what happens a lot of times is that post-sales teams are always coming from behind, right? Like sales, it's like, all right, we got to hire sales. at a time. We get a build sales, get that. That makes a ton of sense. And then it's like, okay, it worked. Great. We have all these customers. Crap. What are we going to do? And then your support or your onboarding or your CS team is like drowning, right? And they're always coming from behind. Yeah, I get it, right? You got to keep an eye on burn. You have to be scrappy as an early stage, but I would say keep that in mind because, again, coming back to that customer experience, that moat that you want to build, you could have a really simple model, right? For every X customers or for every X $100,000 we sell, then we know that we need to be able to support that on the other side. So just keep that piece in mind. That's it, guys. So thank you. Hopefully there are some questions. Thank you. Whew, I got through that a little quicker than I expected.
No, this was amazing. This
right.
was fantastic content. Again, happy to kind of toggle back and forth between in-person versus virtual. So again, all my in-person attendees, speak nice, loud, and clear into the mic so that way virtual attendees can benefit as well. And we'll kind of like pop back and forth.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Question. So if the onboarding is for customers who are employees, so those are internal customers, what's the difference here? Is there a difference or is a customer?
That's a great question. And to your point, employee onboarding is obviously super key, right? And that's another thing that I feel like is sometimes hard for startups to wrap their brains around. I think the principles, I've never thought about that. I think the principles are the same, right? You want to be clear. Here's a timeline. I do think having things, so what I've done with onboarding employees in the past is having like a do and a read list. So here's all the reading in an ordered list, right? Like, so here are the basics, read this, now read this, now read that. And then they'll have a series of tasks, which is like, okay, you read this thing about the basics. Okay, now do it in the product, right? If that's their job, right? Okay, you did that, great. Now do this within the product. So I think the difference might be even more hands-on, right? And they're obviously going to have more access to internal folks. So like coordinating conversations with, so say you're an onboarding person and you're onboarding yourself into the company, maybe there's a conversation that you can have with the product team and they can kind of give you an overview there. So that would be a difference, is obviously you get more internal knowledge, but certainly like milestones, homework, having them do versus just watch videos, I think all those principles apply. Sure.
Awesome. I think another question that we have coming virtually is, say you're gaining this feedback from customers that have gone or are going through your onboarding process. Some of it's positive, some of it's constructive.
Yeah.
If you're getting a ton of constructive feedback, how internally do you prioritize sort of which part of the customer support kind of journey and onboarding journey you address first? How are you kind of, I guess, assembling that hierarchy of this is what we need to tackle first, second, third, and kind of, through the progression? Gotcha.
Well, I mean, depending on what the customer feedback is, like obviously that would be where you need to address that. That would be different. But, these are the customer journey is a continuum, right? And, some of the other things that we were talking about before was like, hey, like a great onboarding experience starts with a great sales experience, and a great CS experience starts with a great onboarding experience. So getting back to root causes. So like if there's a misunderstanding, if there's a mismatch of expectations, to me, I would start like, okay, what happened in that sales call? That was good. Okay. What happened after that? And just trying to go back, but it is a continuum, right? So starting where the customer started, and I think working through that, trying to figure out where was the broken piece would be what I would probably do. If the feedback was like more general of like, oh, this wasn't great,
Sure. Any in-person questions?
Thank you so much for that talk. That was super helpful. I have a question about almost like a scope of responsibilities of a customer success team, because you mentioned renewal, expansion, upsell, even things like changes to a contract or checking that the customers pay the invoice, something more tactical about like account management. How often do you see that falling on a customer success team versus the sales team coming back, or like the finance team being involved, and how do you share some of that data?
Great question. All the time. So this this might have struck a chord with you, and we were talking about how like the customer success team can become the everything department very quickly, and their jobs to be done, right? It's like, okay, be the relationship person, be their best bud, be their trusted advisor, and then nail them in negotiations. And it's like, well, like, okay, there are some people who can do that really well, but if you're talking specifically about commercials, I think it kind of depends, or not kind of, I think it does depend on the complexity of your product, how you do pricing, and what those conversations are like with the customer. So for example, if you have really like value-based pricing, meaning like, okay, the customer really cares about contacts, they want to grow their email list, and so we're going to do contact-based pricing because as they grow, we grow, and we're both happy about it. And like that kind of a conversation, I think is easier than like where the impact is a little bit less clear, or the pricing model. Sometimes these pricing models can be like really in conflict with like what the customer wants to do, which is kind of funny. But also I think that CSMs can be well positioned to have these commercial conversations when product use equals expansion. So for example, right, like if in that example of like growing contacts, right, if it's, all right, Mr. Customer, I'm going to work with you, we're going to, utilize the product in this way, and then your pricing model is aligned, and like the more contacts they have, they're growing, right? The product use equals expansions. CSMs should probably own those. When it's not that, when you get more complex, when pricing is made up, which a lot of companies, it's just in the customer knows, it's not really based on anything, there's no anchor. Those conversations that are either complex or require heavy negotiations, CS teams like can be successful, but they're not going to be the most successful, because guess what? If they were really successful at that, they'd be in sales and probably making more money, right? So I think it really depends on the growth model and your pricing, and what the jobs of is the job of the CSM, is that aligned with how you grow customers? And if there's some conflict there, having someone to come in and like be the negotiator can be really helpful. Hopefully that answers your question.
We have another virtual question. This
Sure.
is more of a specific scenario relative to the industry that this person works
Mm-hmm.
in. So I'm curious to hear your feedback on it. This is an individual that works for an ed tech startup
Okay.
and is curious, when we're thinking about teachers within the model that they use, are they the users or the customers? Because they're not necessarily probably the decision maker in implementing potentially a software or practice. They're not the folks that likely are in these initial meetings, but they are the ones that day to day are kind of using. So when you have that dissonance between maybe those that are making the decision versus those who are actually utilizing it day to day, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's where that account mapping comes into play, right? So you have your feet on the ground users, and then you have the decision makers with the budget, and you have to satisfy both of them. So here's the thing. What you need to do, right, with the decision makers is tell the story of success back to them. What they want to know is that, are their teachers utilizing the platform, what their feedback is, whatever the goals that they set up for this platform, are they meeting them? And so having that sort of high level conversation, making sure that, it's hard, sometimes it can be hard to get meetings with those folks. So having some sort of like report that you send to them that can tell that story for you internally, even if you're not in the room, I think is really helpful. And then on the user side, again, it's like, how do you drive adoption? How do you make that a great customer experience for them? Because, at the end of the day, like those teachers, right, are still going to inform the decision to renew or expand, right? And if that decision maker is hearing from everyone below them that, we hate using this is a pain, that will obviously influence their decision. So it's having a different level of conversation. The conversation that you're going to have with the teacher about their day-to-day use is not the same conversation you're going to have with the person who owns the budget. And so value conversation up here, and ease of use, this is how you get stuff done, with the teachers down here.
Wonderful. Other in-person questions?
Good morning. Thank you.
Good
My
morning.
name is Luz, and I really appreciate your session was great.
Oh, thank you, Lisa.
And I wanted to ask you a question about education. We have students, and I would like to know how, what is your advice in terms of doing the onboarding for students, and what might be the ideal team to have in an organization to do that effectively.
Gotcha.
Thank
I have to say, I'm not an expert in ed tech or students, but what I would think is having a lot of asynchronous resources for students, right? I'm guessing they might be more tech savvy than someone my age or older, right? And so allowing them to do it on their own time, having it have a great experience via mobile, right? Because we know that, most Gen Zers are, kind of they're doing more things on a mobile device than desktop. So I would say allowing them to do it in their own time, keeping it short, video oriented, not heavy text. This might be good for everyone actually, would be sort of where I would start to go first. But again, I don't work with students, but maybe that resonates with you. And then you asked about the team too, like who would, well, the team to manage it internally. Yeah. To do the onboarding process. I mean, I think what you need to have in an onboarding process are folks who know the tools really well and then understands who they're talking to really well. So, maybe it's a former student or someone who's been a student recently who understands the contemporary student experience very well, but also understands the tech side. So I would look for people who sit at the intersection of those two things. Hopefully that was helpful.
Awesome. We have another virtual question. Kind of touches on something we discussed a little bit earlier, but would love to have you expand upon it. Any advice for recreating onboarding in a company reluctant to go through change?
Well, how much time do we got? I don't know if we have enough. So here's the thing, right? It sounds like there's some barriers to creating an onboarding program. I think first step is to figure out what those are. Why are there barriers here? And then, addressing them. Like maybe there's a good reason and you just don't know it. Maybe it's just a budget reason. But yeah, figuring out like where the resistance is, and addressing that would probably be my first step. And then once you figure out what those reasons are, what's your condensed case here? Bullets 1, 2, 3. This is how this will focus it on the business, right? This is how this will benefit our business. This is how this will benefit our customers. This is why we want to invest here. I'm guessing it's probably a budget question because it always is, right? So I would say like, hey, you know what? Why don't we do, the other thing I love to do is, this is a test. Why don't we test this out? We'll take a subset of customers. That would be great actually for an A/B test, right? If all of them aren't even doing it and you're like, all right, we're going to take these customers. We're going to do an onboarding program. We don't even have to invest anymore. And then at the end, let's look at their stats, product usage. If you're more of an MRR company versus an ARR company, that you can at least see some of the retention and growth there from an economic perspective. So whenever there's resistance, call it a test, do a small segment, and then be like, see, it worked, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think that calls back really nicely to your earlier point of, you want to be able to express the value add to the customers, but also be able to do it internally.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have another in person? Perfect.
You talked about the external sheet, right? So it can be low tech, just like a Google Doc, making the abstract concrete. Do you have any suggestions for just tools that you found really helpful and maybe affordable to make things look like I'm using Google Docs and I'm happy to go there, but something that's maybe a step up. Canva?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is this presentation. I'm not a designer. Canva.
Okay. And any other tools that you like, this is a really helpful onboarding tool, for example, like when creating how-to packets for step 1, step 2, step 3, anything that you found helpful?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the delivery method. A lot of times those can live just within your knowledge base. And I've used a lot of Zendesk knowledge bases in the past. And so it's sort of a blank canvas. You can use it however you want, right? And so you can even have an onboarding section of your knowledge base, and it's 1, 2, 3 there. And that way you can embed the videos and then link to all of the other things that you might need to link to within that. So it could be super simple that way, and that way it lives online, it's accessible, it's actually discoverable by others, which can be an interesting SEO play there at times. The other thing that I have found works really well are GIFs. This is very tactical. It sounds silly, but a lot of times people don't even want to watch a video anymore. And if it's a super tactical thing of this is where the button for this thing is. Click the button. Just like a little GIF on a loop can be really effective as well.
And a simple thing like,
yeah.
do you use anything to create the GIFs? Or are you guys like going on Jiffy and like,
yeah,
making
super.
them on
Yeah,
your own?
exactly. Like super quick and dirty stuff like that. It's not like fancy. Done is better than perfect in a lot of these cases, right? So. All right.
Thank you.
Oh.
I just was wondering if there is anything like such as re-onboarding. Whenever a company get acquired by another one, or there is a drastic change in management, is there such a thing like re-onboarding?
Well, I think that is, I mean, sure. It almost sounds like re-education, which it can be like that, right? When you get acquired. But yeah, for sure. I mean, if you have an onboarding program at all, and maybe that lives in your wiki, maybe you have an L&D platform that's specifically, custom built for that purpose. I think that's good. Even if you don't get acquired and there's a major change, sometimes it's helpful to be able to go back and reference that. So any of that onboarding information and education that you have, if that's accessible by everyone in your organization to reference back to, I think that could be beneficial for everyone, for sure.
All right. Do we have any other questions? If not, that is totally okay. We can go ahead and wrap everything up. Thank you so much once again, Erica. This is